In the 1980s, a 10-year-old could drop coins into a vending machine and walk out with a pack of cigarettes, and nobody blinked. That is just one of 17 everyday behaviors from the decade that would be illegal, heavily regulated, or completely unacceptable today. We are counting down from habits that now seem merely strange to ones that reshaped industries and saved thousands of lives. Workplace rules that would trigger lawsuits, child safety gaps that seem unthinkable, and public health norms no modern society would tolerate. It all starts at number 17, with a gadget that put a camera in everyone's hands. Number 17, the era of filming strangers with a camcorder. In the mid-1980s, the Sony Handycam and other affordable VHS recorders turned everyday people into amateur videographers. Suddenly, it was common to see someone recording street performers, parades, or even random passers-by, no questions asked. Polls from the time showed more than half of all camcorder owners admitted to filming people they did not know, often for laughs or to capture real life. Magazine features celebrated this new home video craze, but privacy laws had not caught up. There were almost no legal limits on recording in public, and early lawsuits over unwanted filming were rare. This casual approach to privacy would feel jarring today, but it set the stage for later debates about consent, surveillance, and where personal boundaries begin. Number 16, the era of latchkey kids left home alone. In the 1980s, it was common for children as young as 8 to return to empty houses after school, armed with a house key and a list of rules taped to the fridge. Parenting magazines featured tips on making quick snacks and calling 911, while polls from the mid-80s showed that over half of parents with children under 12 regularly left them unsupervised. With more dual-income households and few after-school programs, this arrangement was seen as practical, not risky. State laws rarely set minimum ages for children to be home alone, so decisions fell to families themselves. Over time, concerns about child safety and high-profile news stories pushed Child Protective Services to tighten guidelines, marking a shift from the do-it-yourself independence of the latchkey generation to today's far more cautious standards. Number 15, airline stewardess appearance rules. In the early 1980s, major U.S. airlines openly hired flight attendants based on strict physical standards, including age caps, weight limits, and even bans on married women. Employee handbooks from that era spelled it out. Pan Am required candidates to be under 35, weigh less than 125 pounds, and remain single. Airlines said these rules kept crews looking young and glamorous, but they also excluded older women and anyone who did not fit a narrow image. The tide turned after a series of lawsuits and Equal Employment Opportunity Commission challenges between 1981 and 1985. Courts ruled that these policies violated civil rights laws, forcing airlines to drop the restrictions and update their manuals. The change did more than open doors for more diverse crews. It signaled a broader move away from workplace discrimination and toward fairer hiring practices. Number 14. Amphetamine-laden diet pills on pharmacy shelves. In the 1980s, over-the-counter weight loss pills packed with stimulants like phenylpropanolamine and amphetamine analogs promised quick results with little warning about the risks. Brands such as Fen-Phen and Obitrol were widely advertised as miracle fixes, but behind the bright packaging lurked a serious health threat. Between 1983 and 1988, FDA logged thousands of reports linking these pills to heart attacks, strokes, and dangerous spikes in blood pressure. Emergency rooms saw an increase in young adults showing cardiac symptoms after taking rainbow diet pills. As evidence mounted, FDA issued a wave of warning letters, and by 1989, forced most stimulant-based diet pills off the market. The crackdown marked a turning point, exposing just how vulnerable consumers were to aggressive marketing and loose pharmaceutical oversight. Number 13, casual asbestos exposure was part of daily life in the 1980s. Office buildings, schools, and even home products often contained asbestos, used for its fireproofing and insulation properties. Few people thought twice about ceiling tiles or pipe insulation, even as mounting evidence linked asbestos dust to deadly diseases like mesothelioma. The health risks weren't just theoretical. By the late 1980s, hundreds of thousands of lawsuits flooded the courts, with workers and families seeking justice for exposure that happened years, even decades earlier. The EPA attempted a partial ban in 1989, but the long latency period of asbestos-related illnesses meant the true cost took years to emerge. This wave of litigation and regulation marked a turning point, pushing the country to confront the hidden dangers lurking in everyday environments. Number 12. Ultra-realistic toy guns were a staple of the 1980s playrooms, right down to the weight, the finish, and even the click of the trigger. Many toy pistols and rifles looked so authentic that police nationwide began reporting tragic cases of mistaken identity. In 1987, a series of fatal incidents involving children wielding replica guns made national headlines, sparking a wave of public outcry. By 1988, major manufacturers like Mattel and Daisy agreed to add bright orange tips to their toy firearms, a voluntary step that became a federal guideline in 1992. Before these changes, it was perfectly legal to sell and carry a toy gun that could fool even a trained officer. The shift to orange-tipped barrels marked a turning point, a direct response to the dangers of confusing toys for real weapons, and a clear sign that product safety was starting to outweigh nostalgia for realism. Number 11. Backyard lawn darts, better known as jarts, were once a staple of summer fun, with families tossing heavy metal-tipped darts across the yard toward plastic rings. But these were not just toys. From 1978 to 1987, more than 6,000 emergency room visits were linked to lawn dart injuries, many involving children who suffered skull fractures and even fatalities. As reports piled up, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, CPSC, launched a full investigation, collecting testimony from families affected by the accidents. In April 1988, the CPSC issued a nationwide ban, making it illegal to sell or even own lawn darts with metal tips. Retailers were ordered to pull them from shelves, and a major recall swept the country. The Jart saga marked one of the first times the federal government stepped in to ban a consumer product outright, setting a new precedent for how dangerous toys would be handled in the years to come. In the 10th place, Saturday morning cartoons in the 1980s doubled as prime time for junk food advertising aimed straight at kids. Animated mascots pitched sugary cereals, neon-colored drinks, and snacks loaded with up to 40 grams of sugar per serving, sometimes more than a can of soda. Children watching their favorite shows were hit with an average of 10 food ads every hour, and the commercials weren't subtle. Cereal boxes came with cartoon characters, mazes, and promises of free toys inside, all designed to hook young viewers before parents even woke up. In the background, the Federal Trade Commission debated banning these ads, but industry pushback stalled any real action until the 1990s. Parent advocacy groups and health experts eventually forced a reckoning, linking these marketing tactics to rising childhood obesity. Today, strict rules and nutrition guidelines keep most of these ads off the air, marking a sharp turn from the anything goes era of Saturday morning sugar rushes. Number 9. Office boundaries in the 1980s looked very different from today. Unwanted comments, suggestive jokes, and even physical advances were often brushed off as part of workplace culture, and they were rarely addressed by company policy. A 1985 Fortune magazine survey found that 42% of female employees reported experiencing sexual harassment at work, yet only 12% ever came forward. Most employee handbooks used vague language like, "Maintain a respectful environment," leaving victims with little recourse. Media exposés and landmark court cases in the late 1980s began to change the conversation. But it wasn't until 1991 that the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission issued clear guidelines, making employers directly liable for harassment. This shift marked the end of the boundary-free office, laying the foundation for zero-tolerance policies and training programs that are now standard in workplaces across the country. 8th place, the era of kids riding in cars without proper restraints. In the early 1980s, it was common to see toddlers bouncing around the back seat or even perched on a parent's lap while the car sped down the highway. Laws requiring car seats or booster seats were rare, and most states did not enforce them. By 1985, only 8 states had primary child seat laws on the books, leaving millions of children unprotected. Pediatric studies from the decade showed that serious injuries in car crashes dropped by over 40% in states that enforce child restraint laws. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration began issuing guidelines, and a wave of advocacy followed, but it took years for every state to catch up. The shift to mandatory car seats did not just save lives, it signaled a new era in how society valued children's safety on the road. Number 7. Riding in the bed of a pickup truck was a classic image of American freedom, especially in rural communities. For decades, families and friends would pile into the open back of a truck for trips to the store or a summer drive with no seatbelts or restraints in sight. But the risks were staggering. Studies from the late 1980s found that passengers riding in truck beds faced a fatality risk 3 times higher than passengers inside the cab, especially in rollovers or sudden stops. As crash data mounted, more than 30 states enacted laws restricting or banning the practice by the early 1990s, often after tragic headlines made the dangers impossible to ignore. What once felt like harmless fun became a public safety issue as lawmakers and safety advocates pushed to protect riders of all ages. Today, the sight of passengers bouncing along in an open truck bed is almost unheard of, a reminder of how quickly cultural traditions can shift when faced with hard evidence. Number 6. Corporal punishment in schools once counted as standard discipline. In 1984, a Roper Center poll found that 73% of American parents supported paddling in elementary classrooms. Teachers kept wooden paddles in their desks, and textbooks listed physical discipline alongside timeouts. This approach rested on the belief that swift punishment kept order, but by the late 1980s, the tide was turning. The National Association of School Psychologists issued a policy brief in 1989, highlighting research that linked corporal punishment to increased aggression and long-term behavioral problems in children. School districts began to ban paddling, and by the 1990s, many states had outlawed the practice altogether. The shift reflected a broader change in attitudes about child welfare, moving from physical correction to psychological well-being, and it set the stage for today's zero-tolerance policies on violence in educational settings. Number 5. Cigarette vending machines were a fixture in America in the 1980s, tucked into bowling alleys, diners, and even school lobbies. For kids, buying a pack was as easy as dropping in a few quarters. No questions asked, no clerk to check an ID. A 1983 study in pediatrics found that over 80% of middle schoolers knew exactly where to find these machines, making youth access to cigarettes almost effortless. This open-door policy fueled early smoking habits, with tobacco companies arguing that vending machines were just a convenience for adults. But as public health campaigns gained momentum and evidence mounted linking youth smoking to lifelong addiction, cities began to act. By the late 1980s, local ordinances started banning or relocating vending machines, closing a loophole that had quietly enabled underage smoking for decades. The crackdown marked a turning point in the fight against youth tobacco use, setting the stage for even stricter age verification laws in the years to come. Number 4. Casual drinking and driving was woven into the social fabric of the 1980s. Grabbing a beer before getting behind the wheel was seen as routine, not reckless. At least half of American drivers in 1985 polls admitted they thought nothing of driving after a few drinks. Police rarely set up sobriety checkpoints, and the legal blood alcohol limit in most states hovered at 0.10%, which meant it took several drinks before a driver was considered over the line. That began to change in 1980, when Mothers Against Drunk Driving, MADD, formed after a tragic accident. Their grassroots campaigns brought national attention to the cost of casual drunk driving, flooding the airwaves with public service announcements and pushing lawmakers to act. By the late 1980s, a wave of new laws lowered the legal limit to 0.08% in many states, and the culture around drinking and driving shifted dramatically. Fatalities dropped, and the idea of a designated driver entered the mainstream. The transformation showed how advocacy could turn personal loss into sweeping change, making the roads safer for everyone. Number 3. the wide-open world of unsupervised childhood. In the 1980s, kids could leave the house after breakfast and not return until the streetlights flickered on. No check-ins, no cell phones, just a vague promise to be back by dark. Neighborhoods buzzed with the sound of bikes on pavement and screen doors slamming, as children organized their own games, settled their own disputes, and wandered blocks or even miles from home. A 1987 Gallup poll found that 68% of adults believed kids should be free to roam without adult supervision, a level of trust that feels almost foreign today. With technology limited to landlines and maybe a walkie-talkie, parents relied on community ties and the unwritten rule that someone would keep an eye out. As author Lenore Skenazy later put it, we trusted the world, and the world mostly returned the favor. The freedom of those days has faded, replaced by constant connectivity and a culture of supervision. The shift speaks volumes about changing fears, new technology, and a society that now prizes safety over independence. Number 2. Lighting up almost anywhere was an everyday scene in the 1980s. Cigarette smoke drifted through restaurants, offices, and even hospital waiting rooms. No one batted an eye. At its peak in 1982, Americans bought over 20 billion packs a year, and public spaces were thick with haze. Smoking was just part of the backdrop. The real turning point came in 1988, when the U.S. Department of Transportation banned smoking on all domestic airline flights under 2 hours. For many, this was the first time lighting up was met with a firm no. The move sent a ripple through the culture, signaling that secondhand smoke was not just a nuisance, it was a health risk. In the years that followed, smoke-free laws swept across states, pushing cigarettes out of workplaces, schools, and restaurants. That rapid shift did not just clear the air, it marked the start of a broader movement for public health, showing how quickly deeply ingrained habits can fall when the evidence and the pressure mount up. And finally, in first place, riding without seatbelts was once a fact of everyday life. In the early 1980s, it was normal to see kids bouncing around the back seat, arms out the window, and parents up front with no restraint in sight. The turning point came in December 1984, when New York became the first state in America to require seatbelt use for drivers and front seat passengers. At the time, compliance hovered around 14%, and many scoffed at the idea of being forced to buckle up. But the numbers told a different story. Over the next 6 years, seatbelt usage soared past 70%, fueled by relentless NHTSA campaigns such as Click It or Ticket. Studies showed that these new laws and public pressure saved thousands of lives every single year, cutting traffic fatalities and serious injuries dramatically. The shift did not just change driving habits, it marked a cultural reckoning with risk, safety, and the limits of personal freedom. Today, the image of a family barreling down the highway, unbelted and carefree, is almost unthinkable. The seatbelt revolution stands as one of the most immediate and impactful public safety changes of the modern era. Across all 17 wild moments, one pattern stands out. Society's definition of normal can shift almost overnight when evidence, advocacy, and lived experience collide. What once passed for fun or freedom now reads as risk or outright harm. The 1980s proved that culture is not static. It is a negotiation between nostalgia and progress. Our rules keep changing because what we tolerate shapes the world we live in. Which shift surprised you most? Drop your thoughts below.